Hello, Hafiz.
Hi, Natalia.
Thanks for coming down.
No worries. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Could you tell us more about your practice?
All right. So, as you know, yes, my name is Hafiz. I am a freelance storyteller. And of course, there are many stories in the world, but for me, I choose to focus something that's much more closer to my heritage and also to our position in this area, in this region, being in Singapore, which is focusing on stories, legends, and even texts from traditional literature in maritime Southeast Asia. And being a storyteller itself, you also get to work with different people and also in different environments. So I think that's something that I really appreciate in this line of work that I'm doing because it brings me to unexpected places, like, for example, a park or a garden or schools. So it can be each gig is actually quite different. And I get to learn new stuff and I also get to like research new things as well. And one that I appreciate is actually creating connections between the stories that I've read and actually with the places. So activating spaces and places, especially places of nature itself, and also working with different partners, people that work with nature, not necessarily botanists or gardeners, but also people like, for example, chefs that work with ingredients derived from nature. And oftentimes, one of the common tropes in many of these stories, in traditional stories, are didactic tales, which they warn about the transgressions against nature or taking nature for granted. So it's nice to look and see the connection between like telling a story and the story involves plants from the region itself and also how or these plants came to be or what kind of prohibitions or taboos are associated with this. So in a way, it adds more cultural meaning. As a storyteller, I think I grow to appreciate learning more about these plants and even like ingredients, everyday ingredients with more of these contexts from stories.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing about how you connect people with places and how everything around us, there's stories everywhere that we can learn from. And I'd love to hear more about what you think of some simple everyday items that we often overlook the heritage of.
So I guess one thing that I see every day and also it's like a basic need would be food. And for me, I have a sweet tooth, so I do love desserts and sweets. But I find that, especially in like the younger generation, my generation and even Gen Z and beyond, they are losing appreciation of traditional desserts. I feel, uh, like in Malay desserts itself, of course, the main sweetener would be Gula Melaka. So Gula Melaka is a type of sugar that comes or is derived from the sap of the palm or the nectar of a palm tree itself, specifically the sugar palm tree. And from the sugar palm tree itself, you can also extract other things as well. The seeds itself can be used, and it's also used in ice kacang, in a sweetened form, which is known as your atapchi. Yeah, so from your atapchi, you can get the dessert in ingredient in your ice kacang dessert. Or of course, the more famous one will be the nectar, which then is processed into sugar for gula melaka, which is used for almost all Malay desserts. Yeah, and it provides a very interesting flavor profile. It's not like your refined white sugar, where it has a very distinct, or I would say very sharp, unadulterated like sweetness, like it punches you straight. But for gula melaka, it's a bit more mellow, a bit more caramelized, and it has that kind of like rich flavor to it, which lends well to Malay desserts. And oftentimes it's paired with coconut milk to provide that balance of saltiness and sweet. Because as we know, a salt and sweet combination actually works. It serves to amplify the flavor profile of each other. So it's really very much complementary. Yeah, so if I were to think of one, it would be gula melaka as an important ingredient in Malay desserts. And to understand there are differences in flavor profiles or even something like sugar. Yeah, so even something like Malay desserts, if you've tried Malay desserts, they are not overly cloyingly sweet. They are not as like a sharp sweetness, like for example, like Western cakes. Yeah, so it has a much more mellow profile, that it's not meant to like hit you straight away like, oof, okay, this is very sweet. It actually would balance out with the coconut milk, so you have like different textures, different flavors, which balances each other out.
Yeah, it's true that something as simple as our food, if we take it for granted and don't learn about the stories behind it, there's so much that we're missing out on in terms of the appreciation that we could have for that and everything around us. And I'm also curious to hear if you'd like to share about any intangible cultures that have been passed down in your family and your community.
Yeah, since we are on the topic of food, something that is would be practiced is recipes, so cooking itself. So I think that's something, the cooking and with food, there's also the opportunity and the opening for stories, because it's over food that we share stories. Or even in the process of making food, you will hear stories or anecdotes of maybe of people long ago, or even of older relatives who have passed on, like your grandparents or maybe your great grandparents, of how they used to do this. So I feel like there's a connection with your ancestors, and also it's a connection with your living relatives, and also with your culture itself and the environment, because it's a very visceral kind of uh experience, when you, because you've been using your hands, you'll be feeling it. It's very different when you are putting it in the machine and like, all right, let the machine do it. But yeah, when you're doing it with your hands, with the pounding and everything, you experience it in a very wholesome. It really provides you an environment that you experience all five senses: your sight, smell, touch, and even hearing, the hearing of the cacophony of like the pounding, or even the sizzling of like the pan itself. These are things that can't really be taught, I feel. I mean, they are taught, but it's not something that you can learn through like reading. It has to be like experience, like right there at the moment itself. And the way Asians teach is quite different, I feel. There's not, uh, I wouldn't say it's like gut feel. It is gut feel, but I think there is a science in the madness, where behind the vague instructions of like without saying like how many grams, or that kind of thing, it's more forgiving, I feel. That like you would adapt the food based on your audience, or who are you are serving it to, and then you will like the Malay word, which is agak-agak, like an estimate. Like if you know the person can't handle spice, then of course you would estimate how much that you want to put in. Or let's say like, oops, I maybe have like this much ingredient in currently with me right now, so like, all right, we'll like change it up a bit, like in terms of the ratio, because this is how much that we have, that kind of thing. So it's very reflexive, very adaptive. And I'm not sure, maybe it's also a reflection of how in essence cooking itself is a representation of our connection with the environment, because it really depends on what you have. And also, when we say environment, it's not just natural environment, but also the human environment, where, like, for example, introduced ingredients. Noodles were introduced by the Chinese, so we won't have things like mee soto without contact with China and with Chinese people who are probably like came here, like, and the Malays will be like, wow, like the Chinese are like eating these very interesting food here that they are slurping, like, what's that? Like, oh, that's mee, like, or mian, like, okay, okay. Then like, I think we can do it as well. It's like, let's how about like we cook it, like, oh, we can put this in like mee goreng or mee soto or mee siam, and then it becomes something different. Is it through contact with different communities, and then it becomes something localized. You'll not find mee soto in China, but definitely we know that noodles came from China, and how it's realized is very different. Yeah, and from the environment itself, the usage of like spices, which is or lemongrass, especially like in soto stock, that you don't really find in, like, let's say Beijing cooking, like, or yeah, in Macau, or in Guangzhou, that kind of thing. So it's also very much dependent on the environment. So yeah, like food as a reflection. If you have time to actually step back and reflect, of like these like unspoken intangible traits. Yeah.
Mm. It's so great to hear you reflect about how cooking is a community endeavor that involves care, intuition, adaptation, and there's so much that we as young people could kind of learn from our family, our community, and bring forward with us. Because nowadays, our society is structured quite differently from the generations that came before us. So, would you like to share about a few ways that you reinterpret your own heritage and make it somewhat personalized to you?
I would say if you know me, is that yeah, if I ever go out, it's really through like my attire. I'm a fan of stories. I mean, the fact that I became a storyteller, it just shows I'm a very capable person who like to like listen in to any story. So like it's not just stories from people by people, but also stories encapsulated or contained within things like food, woodworking, or even textiles. And compared to, let's say, a woodwork, which I can't bring around, textiles, which can be adapted to clothes, is really something that is something that you can practice and you can bring around, which then, in a way, is a proud marker of your identity, your cultural identity. But at the same time, also putting a spin to it as well, that you don't want to be boxed in so-called like when we are talking about traditional textiles or even traditional attire, there is this danger of also of preserving. When you preserve something, the thing stays frozen, locked in time. It does not move. But then the fact of being human is also to evolve. So culture also evolves over time. That people fail to realize that that cultures will evolve. Even fashion, especially, it changes. You know what? One thing that goes out of fashion then suddenly becomes fashionable again a few generations later. So it's very cyclical in that sense. And for me, when working with traditional textiles, is sometimes I don't want to really just do a traditional silhouette. I may be inspired by a traditional silhouette, but I'll do my own take on it so that it becomes also part of my own personal image, but inspired from these like traditional silhouettes. And also with traditional textiles, oftentimes they are imbued with stories. So it depends on like what I'm feeling today. So in a way, it's also my storyboard. Yeah, so let's say if I'm going out, okay, what am I feeling today? Or am I going to a certain event? What do I want to showcase or what do I want to highlight? So it could be something like these. So that would actually, so in a way, there is a thought process whenever before I step out of the house in terms of curating what I put on my body itself. And textiles, especially, they are almost like your second skin that you can't really do without. You don't walk out of the house naked, that kind of thing. So it's like your second speed. So you curate like what kind of stories you want on your body. So
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is that we're always curating the things around us to continually tell stories to the people around us, to ourselves also, and continually learning from that process about that process of becoming and how we honor our cultures, how we honor our own personal identities. So I'm curious at this point to find out if, I mean, you're a storyteller. Would you happen to have, say, a favorite myth, or maybe you might like to share some thoughts about mythologies and how they make us who we are?
I would say one that I really like would be the tale of ikan trubo, which is a type of mackerel. Specifically, it's called the Hilsa Shad, Shad. Uh, it's a love story between a saltwater fish and a freshwater fish. So it's between the Hilsa Shad that lives in the Straits of Malacca, who fell in love with the climbing perch, which is another fish that lives in brackish waters. So the Hilsa Shad is a fish that rules over the Straits of Malacca. So he's like a lordly fish, but he's lonely. He wants to find a partner, and so one day while he was swimming, he chanced upon a commotion. There were fish gathering, maybe in the coral reefs, and so he was curious. And from there, he saw that there was a fish in the center, which was the Asian arowana, the ikan kelisa, who was narrating stories about her travels to different freshwater kingdoms. And she was telling of how she chanced upon a pond kingdom, and in that pond kingdom, there was this absolutely beautiful fish princess, which is ikan puyu puyu, which is the climbing verge. And so from the story, like, oh wow, who is this princess? I want to see her. So ikan terubok asked the Asian arowana, like, could you bring me to see this princess? And so the Asian arowana brought him to see the kingdom and then the princess, and he was immediately smitten by her at first glance and couldn't think anything else but her. So he was lovesick, and he asked his generals, like, what should I do? I really love her. I want to make her mine. And the general said, like, if you want, we are saltwater fishes. We live in the sea. We are much more bigger than a freshwater fish. We can easily invade her kingdom and take her and can bring her to you. And he was agreeable with the idea. Only one fish that injected and objected, like, openly, which was the barramundi, the ikan siakap, who told ikan trubok, like, have we not learned from our neighbors, the dar fishes, the ikan koda of Singapore? They tried attacking the land dwellers, and look what happened to them. They were massacred. They were stuck out to the banana trunks, and they were massacred. I don't think so is wise, Your Highness, to have any dealings with with land dwellers or anything related to the land itself. I think we just stick to the sea. And besides, there are many other fish in the sea. Why must you go after that freshwater fish? But he was lovesick, and like, no, I need to help her. And so they decided that, okay, we are going to launch an invasion when the tides are high during the full moon. Uh, Unfortunately, sitting in the meeting as well was a double agent, which was the eel. So the eel was a double agent to the Pawn Kingdom. So the eel swam all the way and then told the princess, like, oh no, the Ikan Trubo is going to launch an invasion on our kingdom. And yeah, we need to be prepared. But we are small freshwater fishes. What can we do? There was panic in the court itself. Some fishes actually fled further inland, while other fishes were resigned to their fate. That, all right, if what will be, will be. As for the princess, she retreated to her quarters and really prayed to her ancestors for guidance and for aid. And so the day of the invasion on the full moon, the fish from the salt water, they all swam all the way up until the river mouth, and they decided to rest for a while, but that was a mistake on their part. And so when they were resting at the river mouth, that was when many of their kinsmen were captured by the fishermen, because they would know there is a high tide, and the fishermen would lay out traps. So many of them were stuck in the trap. And so they feeded to the prince Ikan Trubuk to return back, but he was so engrossed in his goal that he left and left them and swam ahead and left them. So he didn't even get their prize. So he swam and swam all the way until he reached the Pawn Kingdom and we found that it was empty. Instead, what had happened when during the movement of the armies itself and during the promotion, the ancestors heard the prayers of Ikan Puyu Puyu, the climbing perch, and they sent a torrential downfall which toppled a tree, and then that tree sprouted in the middle of the Pond Kingdom itself, which led to the climbing perch climbing up the tree and up the tree and into the branches, into the foliage, in the protection of the ancestors. And so when Ikan Trubuk came, he found that the Pond Kingdom was empty. There was no one there. He had lost the princess, and when he turned back, there was none of his armies or his followers because they have all been captured by the humans. So he returned back sad and alone back into the states of Malacca. So it's a story about, in essence, I guess, differences in status. Like one is from the sea and one is from freshwater. It will never work. I guess it could also be long distance relationships. I guess it could be an allegory to that, but it's also a historical reference to episodes where some would say that, the Ikan Trubok represents the Dutch face in Malacca, while Ikan Puyu Puyu represents a kingdom, an inland kingdom in Sumatra. So when the Dutch invaded that kingdom or led an assault against the kingdom, the royal family fled inland, so it's like representing the Ikan Puyu Puyu, the climbing perch that climbed up the tree further in into the forest itself, escaping the clutches or the reach of the Dutch. What's interesting about the Shire, it also makes mention of several different kinds of fishes that were native and indigenous to this region itself. So that's very interesting from like the environmental perspective. You know, what could have changed by that? Because this story was composed a few centuries ago. And over time, there's water pollution, changes in the river channels, or even land reclamation. Could this have affected like the fish if like this story were to be composed again? Can we still see the same fishes that was actually mentioned in that poem? Yeah, so it's like very interesting, interesting that from a story you can bring so many things, historical aspect, environmental aspect, yeah. And even like I guess the social aspect as well. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a really fascinating story, and I agree with you fully that the story isn't just about this maybe unmoralistic lesson of like don't venture into territory and take what's not yours. There's also so much that we can learn about the time in which the story was written. Right. So Hafiz, could you share with us perhaps any folklores about Gula Melaka that you know of, or the maritime influences of Gula Melaka?
That's an interesting question. Where although gula melaka is used a lot in the desserts and I guess extension cooking in this part of the world, but there, as far as I know, and I've been researching on it, and I do want to find a gula melaka myth or legend, but so far I've not come across any. But gula melaka is interesting as well. In Singapore, we have different types of gula melaka. So one, of course, the gula melaka that is produced in Malacca itself. Ultimately, like I mentioned earlier on, is actually derived from the nectar or the sap of the uh, fluorescence of the palm tree itself, from a type of palm tree. But another source where you will get gula melaka, but is Bula Aret, which come from Java itself. So it's Bula Jawa. So it's Bula Jawa and also Gula Melaka. The flavor profiles are somewhat similar, but there are also differences in terms of the taste and I guess also the characteristics as well. But you'll find that it's used almost interchangeably in Malay desserts. Yeah, but some would swear with one variety over the other. So some would say that, oh, the gula melaka, if they use the gula melaka that is imported from Malacca itself, is one of the best. Some would prefer Japanese gula melaka. Gula melaka also acts as like as a molasses that is included, or in this case, like gula jawa, which is included in, for example, things like sweet soy sauce, perhaps. In desserts itself, it can be found in many different forms. Some it can be like in liquid form, or usually in dried blocks, because normally you would fill up, and then you would cook it inside like a bamboo tube, and then after that, once you cut it up, then and once it's dried and everything, hence you see it's like in these circular blocks because it's actually like cooked inside like a bamboo cube sort. Where you cut it up, then like okay, so that's the kulit laka that is there. You use it for one, you can use it as a syrup, like for example, Kueh Lopez, where it's like this triangular glutinous rice kind of like cake, sprinkled with shredded coconut flesh. And so you have gula melaka as a side, as a syrup that you would cut and then you would dip. Others is already inside the filling, which is like onde onde, which is our version of the mochi. So you put it in and it pops, and then you get like this burst of sweet flavor. And again, coconut is always a very nice pairing with gula melaka. It's oftentimes paired together. It's really like the star couple in Malay desserts. Like okay, it has to be gula melaka with coconut itself. Another form that I like would be the forages. That uses gula melaka, or you could say like the dessert soups, which is pengat is one, where you get plantains, or it could be jackfruit, or it could even be sweet potatoes and cassava, or your bubur chacha, and then you will pair it with gula melaka as well as with coconut milk. So yeah, nowadays people substitute with white sugar, but I feel it's different. Like I said, like white sugar has a much more stronger like sweetness that like hits you, while gula melaka is a bit more gradual. So I still prefer like if you use gula melaka actually, but probably if you want to attain that same sweetness, you might have to put a bit more in. But yeah, but when you mix it with the coconut, it's really a match made in heaven. So in terms of Malay desserts, you have different forms. You have the dried and the wet, and also like the kueh, and also the soups itself. Personally, for me, I really like the soups. It can be enjoyed either hot or cold. You can have it warm and fresh, but if you refrigerate it, then it comes a nice in soup as well. Uh, and it's really highlighting the sweetness from fruits and from the environment itself lah. That is not as processed agil, yeah, versus like white sugar, that is really very highly refined. So yeah, I wish you can turn to like these natural sweeteners and really gain a better appreciation of these species itself. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned there's so many ways that people use it, and also there's so many places where this Gula Melaka is produced, and so many names for it as well, like Gula Aren, Gula Kawa,
Yeah.
Melaka. Then I believe there's also like Thai and Indian Gula Melaka, their own
Yeah,
version
there's
too.
clary, the clary as
Exactly.
well, which is also from the palm itself, coconut palm. So it's different. Even when we are talking about class of sugars itself, just from palm tree, different palm trees will get a different flavor profile. So it's really very interesting to experiment and take a
Right.
look like at that diversity. Within that diversity, is also that unity as well.
Right, exactly. And I see it as a kind of metaphor for how people in this region also kind of visit one another and trade with one another. And there's all sorts of exchange around this archipelago. I wonder if you could share more about what you know about that maritime movements of Gula Melaka.
I would say you see commonalities. Some could really be, it's sometimes it's like a chicken and egg kind of question, like which came first. Is it like they discovered it on their own simultaneously? Or is it like it's to trade and they're like, oh, okay, this is nice. Like, okay, we can adapt this recipe. Because some with similar names and also similar forms, like even if you go to the Philippines, you find also this use of muscovado, sugars, and also with palm sugars used in their desserts. And again, coconut milk is also a very important ingredient that comes in with the dessert as well. Thais as well from the north, and the whole range from Indonesia. Of course, a movement of people would influence cooking itself. Some is really born from necessity. In the age of refrigeration days, and before airplanes, which made travel time much more faster, so you really rely on preservatives. And we are not talking about artificial preservatives, but like natural modes of preserving. One is through salting, the other is through sweetening. So sweetened desserts, which is like there's a type of candied, you could say like candied dessert, or candied fruits, which is known as nira. When, for example, or nira or sira. So like for example, for fruits or like squash, pumpkin, or bananas, they can be cooked in like your coconut. They can be cooked in your gula melaka syrup, and then in a way it becomes like a preserve, because it's like in a thick concentrated syrup. So it's known as pisang syrup for candied bananas or like sugar bananas, yeah, sugar bananas, or even like we have squash as well, and pumpkin itself. So it's really one of the main preservatives as well, to be in sugared form. So I think it's also something that also came about. This popularity also came about because of trade. People were moving, and so they were trading food objects. So they had to find ways to preserve food without a refrigerator. So you either you can salt it, you can ferment it, or in this case, sugar. So it's like also looking at different modes of preservation of food, which I find very interesting from different ways. You can, yeah, like, and it provides a different flavor profile, when it's salted versus when it's fermented and versus when it's sweetened. So I think there's also something that we can look into, like indigenous knowledge, knowledge of the past, that can correspond with what we have in the present. And I mean, these are things that we can still learn. Like what is in the past, you can still gain kernels of like information, kernels that of like practices that we can still practice in modern times in different form, or combining technology with like these different practices to create a continuity. It's like definitely something that's concocted in the 21st century, but there is this kind of like continuity. So, but for that to happen, even like with food, with innovation, um, with fusion food, I feel that before you can make a fusion food or before you can reinvent something, you need to have a firm understanding of the tradition itself before you can reinvent the tradition. Otherwise, it'll just be rootless. Yeah, so it will just be off tangent and just off floating because there's no anchor like grounded in place because you have no firm grasp or understanding of the tradition. So when you want to reinvent, it becomes something almost unrecognizable.
Yeah. That points us back to the relevance of stories as a mode of passing down wisdoms and our communities as a way that we can steep ourselves in these cultures so that we learn how to be as people. And yeah, what you said also about having that exchange and just continually learning with an idea of the context. I think that was very valuable. So, wow, I've learned so much already from talking with you. And if there's just one small thing that perhaps you'd like to leave our audiences with, what might that be?
I would say is really taking the time and also being open to hearing stories actually. Yeah, I think storytelling has been a very ancient mode of knowledge transmission. It's not just a form of entertainment, but it was really a very ancient practice of knowledge sharing. And I feel we don't give ourselves that time of day to experience storytelling. Or more or less storytelling now is being relegated to just an activity for kids. But no, it's really evergreen. It applies to everyone of different stages in life, not just for kids, but also through your adulthood and even in your senior ages as well. Everyone appreciates a good story. But it's really in our day and age, sometimes we don't give ourselves the time, or sometimes we feel that we've grown past, we've grown up and like don't really feel that we are suited to listening to stories. Yeah, so I think it's really taking aside the time and maybe also the bias of thinking that stories are only just meant for a certain demographic, which is kids. That stories are really an ancient way of knowledge transmission. Yeah.
Yeah, and a very fun one too.
Yes.
There's always something to learn
I
from
mean
everyone.
that is also that the logic in the madness, right? Like you will not retain knowledge of something that's so boring that it's just regurgitating out information. But if it's packaged in a way that's fun, that's memorable, that you'll remember and retain it much more better. And it also helps that you would be reminded because there's a motive. Oftentimes every story would have a motive. So let's say if the crux of the story is a Gula Melaka. So every time when you think of a Gula Melaka, you would think of this story if you have heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, Hafiz.
Thanks, Natalia, for having me.
It's my pleasure.